Oh, it's a beautiful sunny day in downtown Burbank. And this is Scott with Dearly Departed Tours. Today's video actually is about somebody that I learned about from downtown Burbank, actually the TV show Laugh-In. And I was driving around Burbank and I found this very cool control box, which is painted to look like Laugh-In. Laugh-In was shot at the NBC Studios. The NBC Studios is now called the Burbank Studios, and but the sound stages are still there where they made the TV show Laugh-In. And those of you that follow me know that I love Laugh-In. I love the style. I love the actors. I think it was a hoot. And it also was in 1969 too. And the reason I'm at this phone box is because I wanted to do a little feature today on the personality Tiny Tim. Today's video is about Tiny Tim. April 12, 2022 is the date that would have been Tiny Tim's 90th birthday. Tiny Tim's birth name was Herbert Corey. He was an eccentric and somewhat bizarre fixture in the Greenwich Village coffee house scene in the early 1960s. Over his career, he used the stage names Larry Love, Emmett Swing, Rolly Dell, Vernon Castle, and Derry Dover. He was once described as a combination of Emma Sumac, Vera Lynn, Carmen Lombardo, and Sir Alec Guinness playing Fagin, topped off with a face like a moonlit New England graveyard. He was brought to the attention of Dan Rowan and Dick Martin, and Tiny Tim was brought in for a guest spot on the hit television program Laugh-In, and sang the 1929 song Tiptoe Through the Tulips. To put it mildly, he was a spectacle. The falsetto voice, the crazy hair. He took his ukulele out of a brown paper bag and played these very traditional songs. He was usually mocked by people, but there was a real sincerity to his performance, and his song Tiptoe Through the Tulips entered the top 40 in 1968 and made him a major star. The song was given a disturbing, sinister spin when it was featured in the horror film Insidious. Tiny married his first wife, 17-year-old Victoria Budlinger, or Miss Vicky as he referred to her, on The Tonight Show on December 17, 1969. Tiny was 37 years old. Over 40 million people watched, making it the second most watched television program of the 1960s, second to the moon landing. In May of 1973, they separated after having a daughter, Tulip. Just a note, Tiny considered himself a gentleman and always referred to every woman he met with a respectful Miss in front of their name. Tiny was just as quirky in life. He was obsessed with hygiene. He refused to wear cloth undergarments. He would only towel off with Viva paper towels. He used Eterna 27, Jergens body shampoo, Vaseline Intensive Care, the yellow bottle, for the upper torso, Vaseline Intensive Care green bottle for the lower half. He applied oil of Olay 8 times a day. He never ate meat or cheese and drank salsa from the bottle. He wore a tie morning, noon, and night. According to a manager, Tiny even wore one to bed. He spent hours every day saying his rosary and prayers. He ate walnuts in the winter. He said, "Squirrels eat them to stay warm. I'm going to do the same." From November to February, his floors were covered in walnut shells. As quickly as his star rose, it fell. He once commanded $50,000 a week in Vegas, and towards the end he was being paid often only to cover his own expenses to judge bikini contests in bars and literally playing in the circus. He said, "It's okay, whether you're a flash in the pan, like me, or whether you last longer at the top. At least you know you've accomplished something. I can go to any library 10 years from now and read the tons of publicity I've received. It was wonderful to have been there once." In 1995, he married his third wife, Susan Marie Gardner, better known as Miss Sue. They moved to Minneapolis. Now, Tiny wasn't in great health, and in September of 1996, he had a heart attack on stage at a ukulele festival in Greenfield, Massachusetts. Doctors said that his heart was only functioning at 40%. He was ordered to stop performing, but Tiny didn't stop. In October of 1996, a tabloid article was published that he only had a year to live. In reality, it was only a month. Refusing heart surgery, Tiny said, "I would rather go out with the same heart I came in with no scars on it." I was given the opportunity to interview Miss Sue back in 2000, and she described his last night alive. Miss Sue's stepmother was a prominent member of the Women's Club of Minneapolis. She asked if Tiny would perform there, and he agreed. That night, Tiny wasn't feeling well and wanted to call the performance off, but being a showman, he didn't want to disappoint anyone. Miss Sue told me that Tiny lost his footing while exiting the limousine, and again on the marble staircase entering the building. She had to hold on to him. She asked him how he was doing, and Tiny informed her that he wasn't taking his medicine. Apparently, that wasn't unusual. Miss Sue said there was a lovely dinner, but Tiny didn't eat much. After the meal, Tiny was introduced to the bandleader and was given a very cold reception. The bandleader didn't know Tiny Tim was to perform that night, and the bandleader refused to have his band accompany Tiny on stage. He claimed that the band didn't know the songs. Tiny asked, "You don't know I'm looking over a four-leaf clover?" Tiny was told that he would have to play without a musical accompaniment. He would be called to perform at 9 p.m. 9 p.m. arrived, then 9:30, then 10 p.m. went by, and he still hadn't been called to perform. Miss Sue wanted to get her stepmother and tell her that Tiny was going home because he was exhausted and didn't feel well. Miss Sue's stepmother went to find the lady in charge. The band leader called a break without introducing Tiny. It was a terrible insult to him. A guest vocalist should always be introduced at the end of a set, when the crowd is warmed up. The crowd had filtered out of the room, leaving only a few people. This was a deliberate insult by the band leader. The lady who ran the affair went up to the microphone and introduced Tiny to an empty room. Tiny got up and stood at the microphone. The cords were tangled around his feet, and the ukulele was out of tune. He was sick, but he didn't want to disappoint the guests. People were applauding him. Sue went to take his arm because of the uneven footing and because she could see him shaking. He waved and blew kisses to the audience, something he always did at the end of every show. Sue took Tiny Tim's arm and asked if he was all right. He just stood there and said, "No, I'm not." Those were the last words he ever spoke. A doctor started CPR. The ambulance was there in a matter of minutes. They worked on him for half an hour right there on the floor. The EMTs told Miss Sue that Tim would probably not make it, but she already knew that. They worked on him for another hour and 15 minutes at the Hennepin County Medical Center before they gave up. Tiny died at 11:20 p.m. on November 30th, 1996. He was 64 years old. His wife was at his side. His cause of death, heart disease, diabetes, and congestive heart failure. So here's my picture with Tiny Tim, Herbert Corey, that I took, was taken July 23rd, 1990. God, was it 93? It was. When Tiny was performing in Chicago and with his electric ukulele. It was a fascinating show, to say the least. And I love that. Miss Vicky won't be there. I'm sure he just thought that was hilarious. But it was a great show, a very interesting show. I went there with a kind of a closed mind. I was expecting to be there to mock him, kind of. It was not very nice. But, you know, one thing was really certain, was that he gave his performance everything. He loved being on stage. It was bizarre at times when he was doing ukulele solos and he was writhing on the floor and his stomach was, you know, kind of flopped out and stuff like that. You know, in retrospect, I appreciate his performance a little bit more, but it was just bizarre. Anyway, so Christian Carlson from Illinois sent me this package of amazing artifacts, and I'm going to go through them now. He acquired them from a man who inherited Tiny's estate. There's a picture of Tiny's last performance, and that jacket that he's wearing right there was cut up by Tiny's last wife, Miss Sue, to present to fans. And there is a piece of that jacket, that very jacket, buttonhole. So, Christian, you sent me these amazing things. Put that aside. This was Tiny's business card. He actually gave these out. 20th Century Promotions, Cranston, Rhode Island. The man who needs no introduction. From marrying on national television to his hit song Tiptoe Through the Tulips, he's been entertaining audiences of all ages his entire life. His music is currently available on the Rounder record label and music stores throughout North America and Europe. If you've never seen him in person, make a point of doing so, and we did. This is a promotional thing for Tiny, just a postcard, but you can see it was used in his album cover. God bless Tiny Tim. So, just a blank postcard. Now, oh yeah, Tiny in his stage outfits wore suspenders, braces if you live in England, but just to hold your pants up. And Christian got a couple of sets of these suspenders, and inside of them, were the clasps that held them up, and there was hair trapped in it. So this is actually Tiny Tim's hair, which, cool. We've got Tiny Tim's hair. Tiny Tim hair. So not a lot of people can say they have that, or maybe they can. I'm just not aware of it. Now, Tiny, this is a will that he had made out, just a copy of it, obviously, in June of 1995. Herbert Corey, known as Tiny Tim, being of sound mind and body, hereby, da-dee-da. Well, you'll be able to read this if you pause it. It's a little bit difficult to read. Probate file, 1994, 1996. Surviving spouse and children of the decedents. So, and here's a copy of Tiny's death certificate, which you saw earlier. Now, this is fascinating. This document, in this document to Miss Susan Corey, Tiny's last wife, this is the bill for Tiny's funeral. This is the actual, real bill for Tiny's funeral. Sanitation, preservation, so that would be embalming, preparation, visitation, $240, funeral service, $240, transfer place of death, the hearse, $185, the lead car, $75, service, police, $337. So you can see the casket, that was $13,000 for that casket. That was a lot of money. Death certificates, $8 a pop. Musician, organist, flute, trumper, cantor, trumpet. So the entire cost of his funeral was $18,000, $18,196.42. Here's the receipt from the funeral home to Miss Sue, Tiny's last wife, widow. So it was paid in full with a check. Another very interesting item. Tiny is buried in Lakewood Cemetery. This is the purchase agreement. This is the actual purchase agreement for Tiny's grave. I covered up the any kind of real identification of Miss Sue, but you can see this dated the 2nd of December 1996. Mrs. Susan Corey bought the grave. $8,300 it was for the grave. For entombment, inscription data. So it was paid by credit card. $8,160. $8,760. So this is the actual receipt for his grave. And Christian, thank you so much for sending these to us, Christian Carlson. You are so awesome to know that these would go in a good home, and they are. What's this? Lakewood Cemetery Association, special notice, Minnesota private non-federal. Yeah, this is just yada yada business from the cemetery. This is a copy of his eulogy at the funeral home. The cultural turbulence of the late 60s produced many strange phenomena, but none stranger than Tiny Tim, a pear-shaped singer with a beak nose, scraggly shoulder-length hair, and an outfit that could be described as haute couture bum. We might add that there was a shopping bag, the makeup, the incomparable rendering of Tiptoe Through the Tulips, eccentricity, idiosyncrasy, quirkiness. Tiny was a genuine, joyful, pear-shaped celebration of all three. Even more captivating about Tiny than any of that, I think, was his rare gentleness and uncommon kindness. He was perhaps the kindest man I ever met. Courtly in his manners, lavish in his courtesies. Whoever might approach him, be they teeny bopper or bishop, scraggly or chic, wearing Chanel or schlock, Tiny wouldn't fail to attend to them with care, ever patient, never rushed. He would relish their name and afford them a title, a mark of honor and respect, just for being a person. Tiny had a heart and saw and acknowledged the dignity of the person before him, particularly the least brother and sister, who some might consider quirky. He knew that, before all else, each and every person was a son or daughter of God. On the occasion of their marriage, Miss Sue wrote this in their wedding program. People said Tiny was crazy. They said he was ugly. I thought he had beautiful eyes, a wonderful smile, and the greatest hair in the world. I even loved the famous nose. I loved everything about him. At times, we might think ourselves crazy or ugly or fat, and might, in all that, think ourselves unlovable. But then, as if from God, someone comes along and loves us, not in spite of it all, but loves in us everything that we ourselves consider to be unlovely. There's no more exquisite an experience in all of human life than to be loved like that, to be loved in our seeming unloveliness, to be loved as God loves us. Tiny got a glimpse of that audacious love of God in his adoring wife. He offered some of the same to whoever approached him. Woody Allen once said, I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve it through not dying. Tiny seems to be dead, his passing away thought to be an affliction, and his going forth from us utter destruction. But he lives. He is in peace. Tiny lives now in the exquisite, audacious love that God will never let him go. Tiny, may your good works never die. May you live forever. The Reverend Dale Corrigy, Basilica of St. Mary, for private use only, not for distribution, even though it was a public funeral. So this is the prayer and service at the time of dying and death. So this is actually the commendation service. So this was used for the actual service. Here are prayers for Tiny, O God of love. Grant him rest and peace in your presence. The Lord's Prayer. Prayer for family and friends. Gracious God, be present with those who mourn the loss of Tiny. And the benediction, may God, the Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer of life, bless you and keep you now and in the time to come. Peace be with you. Amen. Tiny Tim, Herbert Corey. Miss Sue said, Tiny was a glamorous man. He still had the aura. What do you call it? Presence, charisma, he still had it. She added, he really tried to be a good person. Thank you so much, Miss Sue, for your time. Christian Carlson, for your awesome donation to the archives. And I'm so grateful to Becca Manel, who helped me with the information so long ago. I want to thank the people who are subscribing to this page. 100,000 subscribers I hit last week, which is pretty cool. I thank you for that. I want to thank especially the people who are supporting this page by the Patreon or PayPal link below, especially to Ann Meyer, you were so kind. Virgil Blum, you were so kind. My buddies at Lucky 7 Tattoo in Tahoe, thank you so much. Ingrid Florio, Margot McCumber, Meet No One, Colleen Fowler, Melissa Dunbar, Shannon Rushman, and Jan Ackelson. You're all so very kind, and you're all so very generous, and I am so grateful. And as Tiny Tim once said, death is never polite, even when we expect it. And as I say, you heard me.
99 little angel.